Persuasion is not the proof of a fact, but is something that reaches deeper than the mind and touches the soul to change. Thus, the goal of this presentation isn't to convince you, but to help you arrive at your own conclusions about the existence of God and the life, death, and resurrection of His Son, Jesus Christ. One can be told a fact, that the world is round, for example, and refuse to believe it. Why? I think it's because of distrust. The unbeliever might understand that the thing being told to him is true, but refuses to believe it because he doesn't believe that it's in his best interest, which that can be for any number of reasons. And this is something that you have to judge for yourselves. So I simply ask that you walk with me through this logical progression, step by step. So the first topic I will cover are 2 arguments for God's existence through Jesus. The second topic will go over common refutations of God's existence. And lastly, I will rebut those refutations. So to begin, St. Thomas Aquinas, possibly the greatest theologian of the Christian Church, was so great because he was a master tactician of Aristotelian logic, which is held to be the chief of deductive reasoning. In his great work, the Summa Theologica, St. Thomas deduces the existence of God through 5 proofs. And these are loosely based off of Aristotle's ancient existential questions. So the 5 proofs are: God is the first mover, the causation, contingency, degree, and final cause. And he goes into great depth into that, and I encourage you to check it out. A more modern argument is this statement: Jesus Christ was either Lord, a liar, or a lunatic. Just think about that for a minute. This famous quote belongs to C.S. Lewis, taken from his book, Mere Christianity. The idea he presents here is pretty self-explanatory. It's clear that either Jesus was telling the truth about who he is as the Son of God, that he was a liar, or he was a madman, clearly. C.S. Lewis explains that Jesus was not mad, otherwise no one would have followed him. He wouldn't have been able to affect 2,000 generations worth of belief. Which leaves us with 2 options: that Jesus is Lord, or he was something much worse, a liar and a deceiver. But he addresses this too and says that his disciples must have perpetuated a legend if he was a liar, which is absurd if you really think about it, because no one dies for a legend, and all of his apostles except one were martyred, and that's not including the early church. Many people were killed for this belief. And finally, he is quoted saying, "Now as a literary historian, I'm perfectly convinced that whatever else the Gospels are, they are not legends. I have read a great deal of legend and am quite clear that they are not the same sort of thing." So this leaves one possibility, that Jesus Christ is Lord, and that changes everything. Now we turn to the 3 most common reasons for disbelief, arguments for disbelief. The first reason is rational, which denies God's existence on the notion of science. And people quote Charles Darwin a lot in the theory of evolution, and essentially that science disproves God. The second relates to the problem of pain, refusing to believe in a higher power because of tragedy. The third argument addresses need. There's simply no need for God because societies dictate morality, and that in turn is interpreted personally, and nobody can infringe upon that. And that is where we get our political correct society from. What need is there of God if I can turn my light switch on and behold, there is light? What need is there of God for his provision if I go to work and I provide my money for myself and my own? Basically, there is no God because I'm my own God. I don't need anyone else. A frequent quote often accompanies this argument from the famous philosopher Kant, which is actually out of context and misplaced because he was a believer in God. I think, therefore I am. We've all heard this, it's all familiar. In this sense, it is placing oneself on the throne of one's own life. It's taking God as the great I am, as quoted in Scripture, and turning it into I think, therefore I am. Now we come to the rebuttals against these arguments. First, addressing the first argument. Many believe that science disproves the existence of God, and yet arguably the greatest minds and forefathers of modern science believe in at least a higher power. Take the greatest physicists, for example, Einstein and Newton, the greatest chemist, Marie Curie, the greatest biologist, Charles Darwin. However, I believe that Einstein says it best when he says, I believe in Spinoza's God who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists. And Darwin himself saying, I have never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of God. This list doesn't even include Kepler, Galileo, Francis Bacon, which were staunch Christians specifically. Moving on to the second argument, addressing it, the idea of atheism is basically out of the question because through the evidence in creation, we can reasonably assume that there is a God. So here I will. So now the second argument is what kind of God lets bad things happen? If there's a higher power, then why wouldn't he use that power to keep bad things from happening? Here I'll draw from the beginning of this speech and say that a personal God that allows the free will of humanity. Because if we agree that the empirical evidence of creation or an intelligent creator exists, we can know that he has nothing to gain from our suffering. Yet quite the contrary to all other religions, we have a God who suffered himself and therefore takes on that suffering and promises to all that believe in him a resurrection like his. So there's a hope and a promise for salvation through the pain that we experience. And this is the gospel. Finally, the most difficult argument to address is indifference, agnosticism, because the hope of Jesus is for those who need and desire more. It's for people who need hope. They can find hope in Jesus and have. It's for those who need peace. They find peace in Jesus. They find forgiveness. Those who want forgiveness. But for those who want for nothing and need for nothing, they will have no need for God. And such people won't bend their will to anything except brokenness and need and pain. And this is the great paradox, because we ask why there's pain and suffering, and yet in that pain and suffering we often find a God who cares and loves us. So in conclusion, I hope that you found something that I've said today that resonates as true. And if you have found truth, then perhaps a change, no matter how small it is in order. I have nothing to gain from changes you may make in your life, but you do. You have everything to gain, and I hope that you do. Thank you.